And we're back. Welcome to Abstractable. My name's Lachie and this is Ryan, and this podcast is for curious people who love to learn new things like us. In this episode, we're talking about the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
What do we cover off? We talk about how your mind is always playing tricks on you, especially when you think it's not. We talk about how Amos Tversky, his partner, and Daniel Kahneman changed the entire game of psychology and economics. We talk about heuristics and biases, which they are both the fathers of. We also cover off a few different things that you can employ in your daily life to combat some of these tricks that your mind's playing. Now, Daniel Kahneman isn't on the socials, but you can learn more about him by reading a book by Michael Lewis, The Undoing Project.
One of my favourite authors.
And also watching his TED Talk. So we hope you enjoy the episode.
All right. Thinking Fast and Slow. Is that the start? No.
You can't do it while I'm laughing halfway through the sentence.
Yeah, we're keeping that.
Who gets the final call here?
Well, I guess it's you. It's you because I don't do anything. So
Ryan looks shitty. Cut it. Oh, Lockie's all right.
Yeah. What's going on?
Not much, mate.
Yeah.
We're here to discuss the next book, episode 4.
Wow.
Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman. This is a heavy hitter.
Yeah.
It's a big book, and not too big in terms of size. Where have we got it? It
feels
dense.
like it's like 4 times thicker than that. Though.
Yeah.
When you're reading it, you're like, because I read it on the Kindle, I'm like, this must be like the book I'm sitting this microphone on. We should actually mention the books that the microphones are sitting on.
The weekly appearance of a different book being propping our mics up.
You've got 4-Hour Chef, Tim Ferriss.
And you've got Herbs and Natural Supplements.
Evidence-based guide. Have you read that?
No. This is my sister's a pharmacist.
Oh, cool.
She has been through it. I was impressed they actually do that.
Dense books.
Yeah. I was actually impressed they do that as part of sort of...
I'm surprised, yeah.
...standard pharmacy education. Which is
cool.
It's a great thing.
It's a good book that it's perfect size for a microphone stand.
Yeah, particularly when you're sitting on the ground.
This book's was hard to read in many ways. Well, I don't know about hard to read. When you're actually reading it, it's really interesting, but...
I felt drawn in, yeah.
But I felt you had to be in a certain mind to read it because it is got a lot of dense stuff in it, and some of it's a bit textbooky, I found. But
yeah, I'd agree with that.
That's probably because he's a academic, but
I think density is the right word. But I think when I was reading it, I felt like I had to exert a lot of energy. Like I had to invest a lot of energy into the reading at the time, because there's concepts that you're trying to grasp as you're going through that just either don't click immediately, or you have to take some time to think about them, or you have to take some time to go through, because there's a number of exercises through the book.
A bit like the Black Swan, like that, in terms of counterintuitive or doesn't come naturally to you. Well, I guess that's what the whole book's about. Thinking about that, I actually read this when I was up in the country where there was no distractions, so that kind of probably helps. Yeah.
The country. What country?
Well,
the country.
Outside of Melbourne. That's what the country is, isn't it? Not in a city.
Half an hour out of Burbs, we're in the country.
Pretty much. Yeah.
So, did you get through the whole book?
I did.
Whilst you're in the country?
Not the whole book while I was there, but I smashed a good portion of it.
Yeah.
And allowed me to finish it off when I was back home. But yeah, it's probably, I think we were talking about before we started recording, that it's the book. I didn't think this at the time when I read it, but it's probably one of the books that I think most about afterwards. We'll see it popping up a lot, and pretty bloody interesting.
Yeah, I think it's I don't automatically go back to it all the time. Like it's not like, oh, that was from Thinking Fast and Slow, but it's kind of like it's almost embedded to some degree. Not to say that I've distilled and taken in everything and I'm always aware of everything that was discussed. But,
no, definitely not.
But I think there's
that's
just a couple of...
I think that's impossible.
Yeah.
But...
It goes against the very nature of who we are, as is basically discussed in the book.
But in terms of like going, oh, that's that afterwards, or seeing other people fall into the same traps of biases, and it's hard to recognise in yourself, but it definitely comes up, I reckon. So tell us about Mr. Kahneman. He's had a pretty interesting life.
Yeah.
And before you jump in, there is another book that goes through his life and also his research partner, Amos Tversky, in a lot of detail, written by Michael Lewis, which I've read, called The Undoing Project, A Friendship That Changed the World. And it's a really good book. And it talks about basically him and Amos working together and their ups and downs and all the stuff they discovered. It's really good.
I was going to say, do you want to, because they have a big history together, and I think that's worth noting. And do you want to give a couple of, when did they start hanging out together?
I think they met at university post, I think they'd both got their degrees and stuff and were starting their academic career, if my memory serves me. But essentially, they just clicked straight away, and they're both from Israel, and they're
both from Tel Aviv.
Formed a massive
same place.
Yeah, they formed I think so. They formed a really just incredible partnership where they argued about ideas, but it was just such a fruitful. And he was apparently a very amazing person, and they worked solidly together for most of their careers, but then towards the end had a bit of a falling out due to difference of opinions. And I think that it was sort of talked about in the book that Kahneman didn't feel as connected with Amos because he was sort of loving the limelight a bit and getting wrapped up in that. But he's generally accepted as a just ridiculously brilliant person. But he died quite young, and Kahneman's still alive. And I think you can't receive the Nobel Prize posthumously, so he didn't get a Nobel Prize, but really it was kind of both their work. And
I thought there was
ironically
some sort of recognition that he ended up getting as a result. I imagine Kahneman would have certainly done a tribute to him at the time.
Definitely, I'd say. I think that he's like, it's interesting because it seemed like Amos really enjoyed the limelight and got a lot of the praise because he was kind of a really enigmatic figure. Kahneman was more of a sort of introverted, the quieter guy. But the irony is that Amos died and now Kahneman's probably got most of the credit by just lasting longer.
Durability.
And not to say that he doesn't, like, it's a partnership and they both contributed different things. So, but yeah, check that book out because it's and Michael Lewis is an awesome author. Like, a lot of his books have been made into popular movies, so sometimes when I see that, I'm like, oh yeah, well but his books are they're just like novels almost. They're so readable, but really well researched and interesting.
Strong narrative through them. You mentioned the narratives.
Yeah, and he finds these stories that are kind of personal but really amazing, and weaves the narrative through them. It's really cool.
So 1934, as we said, he was born in Tel Aviv, which is really interesting because Tel Aviv's like becoming one of the sort of the startup hubs, entrepreneurship hubs of the world.
What do you think makes that? Like, I don't know. Like, they've got a strong university culture there, don't they? I think that helps.
There's a big academic culture, but there's also, they're kind of surrounded by, war, unfortunately, which is...
They certainly are.
Yeah.
Silicon Valley has like Stanford and a few of those sort of, I don't know. I guess if you knew what made it you build it.
That's it. But Silicon Valley's just got years and years of experience under its belt, whereas I don't think Tel Aviv definitely has not got as long a track record as.
No.
But it's sort of been one of these things that's just sort of started to flourish. The need for innovation, I guess, the need for development and research, etc. So, not too sure, but I'm sure there's been much commentary done with far more educated people. So he moved to Paris for all of World War II because he was born in 1934, just before World War II. This is including through the occupation of France. And then
saw some bad stuff.
Oh yeah. They were fully embedded in France.
And obviously Jewish.
Yeah, and he's from Palestine, so which doesn't put him in too good a bracket, which meant that he was one of those that was required to wear the Star of David around at the time. And it's quite interesting because he actually tells of the story of what actually first inspired him or got him super interested in psychology. And I actually did want to read it out. So he describes this as his experience of one night where it just triggered with him. So he says it must have been late 1941 or early 1942. Jews were required to wear the Star of David and obey a 6 p.m. curfew. I had gone to play with a Christian friend and had stayed too late. I turned my brown sweater inside out to walk the few blocks home. As I was walking down an empty street, I saw a German soldier approaching. He was wearing the black uniform that I had been told to fear more than any other, the one worn by specially recruited SS soldiers. As I came closer to him, trying to walk fast, I noticed that he was looking at me intently. Then he beckoned me over, picked me up, and hugged me. I was terrified that he would notice the star inside my sweater. He was speaking to me with great emotion in German. When he put me down, he opened his wallet, showed me a picture of a boy, and gave me some money. I went home, more than certain than ever that my mother was right. People were endlessly complicated and interesting. So that was his sort of dawning into psychology, as he describes the led him into that path. And I believe the boy, so he reminded him of the picture of the boy who was his son, the boy's son. And it's such polar opposites.
The anti-Semitism thing is so interesting because, like, if you think about Germany as an example in 1930 something, yeah, that's a good example, is that there's no obvious racial difference. That, a lot of racism is because of the way you look. But do you know what I mean? Like,
going to be really controversial here and say, I was listening to a talk by Brett Weinstein the other day, Brett Weinstein, and he basically went to say that race is not a good way to group. It's simply populations. We refer to populations because what justifies what a race is, there's so much crossbreeding that's happened from thousands and thousands of years.
It's tribalism, isn't it? Like, I guess that's like what happened in Rwanda too.
Yeah.
It's just humans are pretty complicated.
Anyway, get going. I completely threw you off track there.
No, that's basically what I was trying to say, I think. So, it's a bit sapiens-ish, that
but
the
where does it come
mental
from?
models that we create and the rules we create for ourselves and the boxes we put different people and things in. I was thinking about this domain thinking I think I talk about in the Black Swan, where I was thinking about this on the weekend where I was playing soccer and you turn up in your shorts and your really high socks You tuck your shirt in and it's just normal. Imagine wearing that to work. But because you're in this soccer domain of thinking, that's what you do, you know, and it's drawn back from, you know, the English back in the day or whatever. I don't know. But
what about your shin guards, mate? That's why you got your socks high.
Yeah, got the shin guards on.
Protect the bloody shins.
That's right. I have to get near the ball for someone to kick me. Yeah, you know, it's all these weird things that we just compartmentalise into. Yeah, which is kind of what this book's about.
That's the positive, you know, that's the positive sense of where that sort of tribal aspect comes in. You know, that's some of the nice things. You know, it's competitive, but it's, you know, and can be tough, but it's a positive thing. Yeah. But this sort of, as you said, this anti-Semitism that just sort of, you know, without knowing the depth of history behind it, and you know, from thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, even between, you know, Palestine and who's the other guys?
Israel,
Palestine, Israel. Yeah.
It became Israel.
Yeah, became Israel. Without knowing all that, or ignoring that, you just come into this sort of World War II space, and it's just this hate that's been generated because of, it's almost like a battle of the egos, the battle of the tribal ego being scared of what they're going to take over, or what they're going to, you know.
It's just, it comes from being marginalised, and you become insular and look for the enemy.
Yeah. So he obviously spent that time in Paris.
Travelled. So he's a worldly fellow.
He is a worldly fellow.
Probably not by choice.
Yeah.
At the start, anyway.
This is the thing. There was a lot of moving around by you know, people, particularly through those times, either by, you know, force of hand through the war, or just because there was safer places to be, or better places to be than where they are currently situated. And so that sort of experience that he had with that SS soldier was about the age of 7 or 8. So it sort of frames it into context. You know, obviously made it through World War II, and then he studied science with psychology and maths majors, 1954, and then joined the Israeli Defense Force. And this is where he actually describes it in the book about some of the officers' training evaluation that he goes through, you know, where they have to basically lift a pole. A group of soldiers don't know each other, completely anonymous. All the hierarchy is stripped from their, you know, from their clothing or whatever else, and they're just thrown into a group. You know, there might be 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever of them. And it's in essence to determine, it's part of evaluation to become an officer in the army. And the idea was that the leader should make themselves known to the psychologist naturally, just through this exercise, you know, this simple exercise, which is clearly a direct parallel to combat warfare and strategy and everything else that is closer associated with what the officer's role would be. And it's quite interesting because they've got to get a pole over a bar or another pole without them touching one another. And so there's lots of different methods, and the idea was the leader would come out of the group and direct or
lead to victory.
Yeah, lead everyone else on to show them how to get there. But what Kahneman had basically worked out, he said that this is a completely flawed exercise and had no merit in actually determining who the strong leaders were.
I can think of job interviews where I've been in an exact same situation as this, in like not lifting a pole over, but, you know, the group interview. Yeah.
The group interview.
And this, when did he do this? In the 50s or 60s or something?
Yeah, would have been. Yeah, 50s. It would have been in the 50s. But I think the point is making an evaluation on character and leadership in one little exercise is a very difficult thing to do. And he also talks about how easy it was. They knew it was wrong. So he'd worked out that there's clearly a major flaw in the way we're doing this. This doesn't show the leaders that are getting feedback from, where they were being posted, and feedback from the more senior roles saying that these guys are not up to scratch. Like, they're definitely not officer ready, or not for every single one, but certainly some of them. And yet it was just, that was the routine. That was what they knew. So they would fall back into doing the exact same thing.
This is how we do it.
This is how we do it. That's because that's what the book says. We must follow it that way. So 1958, shortly after, he started his PhD in psychology, which led him into his two favourite pursuits, or he's able to follow his two favourite pursuits, which was complex correlation structures and Fortran programming. So he's a tech head.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is pretty interesting. He was then became a lecturer and scientist at multiple unis throughout the US. So he made a move across and then started his collaboration that you were talking about before with Amos Tversky shortly after. And this is their focus of their study was all around decision-making and judgment. They had 7 joint published peer review articles across 8 years, which is I think that's a pretty good push out in terms of new findings. They developed prospect theory, which is around, the pros and cons of situation, or, the value of situation, and heuristics and biases, which we'll talk about shortly. He also moved into this sort of hedonic psychology space in the 90s. This is what makes life, or the experiences that make life pleasant or unpleasant is what the focus is. It's concerned with feelings of pleasure and pain, interest and boredom, joy and sorrow, satisfaction, dissatisfaction.
It's a pretty busy career. Something else I found interesting about there is they both, Amos and Kahneman, at different times, even throughout their academic career, got called back into the army during the 7-Day War or one of those. And they actually were, in combat sort of situations, or at least could have been, I guess, is the point. Whether I remember, they did parachuting and stuff. Like, how crazy is that? Like, you just wouldn't imagine that happening now. To university professors. Do you know what I mean? Like,
but we're also talking a time where, if you translate across to the bloody, say, the UK, Winston Churchill out flying his own light aircraft, or flying from Paris to bloody the UK just because he loves flying.
That's awesome. The best different world sort of thing I like is in the, back when you were a politician, in America in the early 1800s or whatever, that you'd constantly be getting in duels with people, and like you'd be in Parliament and have a fight with someone. Like, imagine that happening now. Like, and you challenge someone to a duel. Like, I think Andrew Jackson, one of the presidents who wasn't a very good person, I'll just say that up front. He got in like 50 duels in his life or something.
He deserves to survive if he's done that.
One of them, he just stood there. The guy shot at him. He missed, and so he just took heaps of time, lined him up, just shot him in the head.
Can you imagine standing there waiting for that?
The honour. You have to do it because of the honour. Yeah, what a different world. But even though these guys going, that would not happen now.
No.
But what do you think about like compulsory military service? A lot of countries still do it. European countries.
Pros and cons.
Well, it's kind of interesting that you spend 2 years in the army or something. Israel do it.
What I like about it is, all the positives that come, all the positive things that you see from a military way of life, which is around discipline, routine, pushing your limits, outside the comfort zone, really seeing how little you need to survive, that type of stuff, and then coming up to the sort of cold face of what trauma and tragedy can look like. I think they're all majorly positive things.
Yeah.
What I'd query is, if everyone did it, would we all think the same? And would we all think in the same mindset?
I don't know. Probably it would have an influence, but everyone goes to school and people think differently. But
then again, not everyone goes to school.
Yeah, I guess.
And I just wonder if it creates too much homogenous in society, too much of a homogenous society. If everyone and every country went through that, you'd sort of be shifted towards your country's way of approaching military.
I'm glad that we don't have to do it, 2 years out of your life or something, if you don't want to do that. But, yeah, it's just a different way of thinking. He's alive now, isn't he?
He is. And unfortunately, Amos Tversky is not, but which you said earlier. And I think he's still quite active too. He's still doing his thing. He's one of those guys that will never cease to stop learning and developing his ideas.
Didn't you say to me that Nassim Taleb from the Black Swan said that Kahneman's one of the only academics he doesn't think is a moron?
Pretty well. That's probably the way he would have said it too. But I think he
so high praise.
Yeah, you've even got the guy that doesn't give compliments giving compliments. we don't shine a great light on.
We love him, but he's a unique unit. Holy. Yeah.
He speaks his mind. So, and then he's obviously been totally invested and immersed in this research, this study, pushing out of new ways of thinking and approaching.
He invented a completely new field. This didn't exist.
It's a paradigm shift in the way we thought that neurology and psychology worked.
And essentially, it's probably jumping into the book a little bit, but it's that your mind tricks you.
It totally does. And I was just going to say on the back end was 2002. We have to highlight that he won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences.
Economics too, not
economic sciences, which is quite interesting because you're talking of systems of interaction and how things move together, which is so interesting. But
it's a good example of someone using something from one domain in another, and the cross-pollination between two different academic streams.
How cross applicable it is.
Yeah.
It's because it's so important for...
And some of the best things happen that way. You don't have to invent something new. You can apply an idea that's in a different country or a different field or a different, maybe wearing shin guards and socks is really useful in other forms of life. I don't know. But breaking through that domain thinking, that's a really good way to innovate. Yeah.
Where can this be applied elsewhere? And then the only other thing was 2013, it was announced by Obama for the Presidential Medal for Freedom, which I think is a pretty high accolade in terms of what the president's able to provide. So no more delay. What can you tell me, Lockie?
So much.
There was one thing I wanted to cover off because everyone who's heard of the book, everyone who's maybe even seen a summary or something somewhere would have heard of the systems that he describes in the book. And I think that's probably a really good place to start.
So the book is about the different ways that your mind analyzes certain situations and is biased by what's around you, inherent ways of thinking and stuff that actually leads to incorrect decisions generally. And that can happen in many different ways. But what he basically talks about is that there's two types of thinking or systems in your brain, system 1 and system 2. They've got proper names, but he calls them that for ease, for people like us, so we can remember them. And system 1 is really
Which is really important. He talks about cognitive ease.
Yes. Is, you're kind of what I'd describe as an instinctual brain. It acts without any need for you to do anything. You can't actually influence it. It's that part of your brain, like your reflexes, that just act because it needs to happen quickly, and you're making constant decisions about different things, and it keeps you, it's great for keeping you out of danger and those sort of things.
There's no voluntary control.
Correct.
Yeah.
Whereas system 2 I'd describe as a deeper level of thinking and more, I suppose, you can control that, and it's probably more considered and allows you to take inputs and make calculations and judgments and things like that. So, and that these two systems are constantly,
bouncing off, working together.
Yeah, I don't want to say
against.
battling against each other, but it's kind of is a little bit like that. And they have very different effects on the way that you act in certain situations.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I'm at the moment reading a book around Buddhism, and they sort of talk about this Tana and a few concepts around our sort of constant dissatisfaction and how the feelings translate into the way in which we act. And quite often we just don't even recognize that sort of what happens in the space between sort of feeling and emotion and action. And that's where there's this disconnect, and that's almost that system 1 sort of influencing on that more effortful, focused attention and thinking, which we think that we are. So we think that we are that sort of attention that is directed.
That's right, yeah.
Which we are not.
No, that's one of his big points is that you can't control this, This just happens, but we feel like we're pulling all the levers, but no, we are not. And there's some pretty interesting stuff that he goes through. I know we don't have, and look, our approach probably here is not to go through super specific examples because there's hundreds of them and we won't do them justice. Probably the idea is to give a feel of some of the types of things that are in the book, and encourage you to go check it out because it does change your perspective for sure.
I think the one thing to highlight on the systems was system 1 really has that focus on what it knows or what it can see. And this is where he leads into this sort of concept of, was it WYSI?
Yeah. What you see is all there is.
Yeah, what you see is all there is.
That's actually a really good way to summarize system 1 and he refers to that heaps of times throughout the book using one of his things. He says that if you repeat things long enough, it sticks with people. He keeps going back to what you see is all there is, and that's the system 1 way, is that inputs are coming in, and if you see a person walking down the street that's really slow and then someone asks you how long it would take to run 100 meters, you're likely to say a longer time because you've just had that input and your brain substitutes the harder question for an easier question. And, subtle things like colours and all sorts of stuff and anchoring and these sort of things really affect. And what's in front of you is what you're likely to use to compute things.
Yeah, it has a major influence, which we are completely blind to.
And can't stop.
Because
to me, that's the main, and that kind of helped me understand the world a bit better, or try to. Because I guess, what does someone say? If knowledge was the problem, we'd all be geniuses or something. Because I still couldn't really understand why people, including everybody, make the same mistakes over and over again, like what they talk about in the Black Swan. And knowing's not enough. This stuff's just involuntary, and it's going to happen. And he gives examples where it happens to him, and he's spent his whole life studying it. So there are ways to deal with it, but you cannot stop these things happening, and that's why people make the same mistakes. And particularly in groups. I think it gets worse in groups.
Yeah, group think.
Yeah, or something about the interaction between people complicates things and makes these types of errors even worse. So.
Yeah, the taking it to the other end of the scale, we've probably talked it in sort of a very negative lens too, because there's some positives that can come from that, and this is where you get into the space of, say, experts, guys that have practiced the right way, whatever it is their trade or art or craft, or a chess grandmaster, and he highlights the intuition that's contained within the sort of chess grandmaster, and it is nothing more than simple recognition. And so they are tapping into this sort of subconscious memory bank, and they've seen this situation play out before, so that they are almost automatically, they're able to feel,
go on the gut instinct as to what it is. But it's only they can't do that without the history of practice and knowing this move goes to this move, goes to this move, goes to this move. They're 10s, 20s, 30s moves in front of where they currently are, and they can see that unfold before them because it's all stored within. It's almost sitting on that subconscious system 1 level. It's that known to them. Yeah, and he talks about not trusting intuition in unfamiliar situations for that reason, that it's basically a repeatable, it's a way to quickly analyse things from the past more than predict new situations. So, but essentially runs through heaps of different types of problems and ideas around how biases and what he calls heuristics. Do you want to have a crack at explaining that? What the difference between those two are?
Yeah. I'm going to do
straight under the bus there.
Okay, I'm going to do a bad job of this, but so heuristic is what he calls a judgment, and decisions are guided directly by feelings of liking and disliking, with little deliberation or reasoning. So this is where we feel in a particular way. We have a positive or negative conditioning or association with a particular thing, so it leads us in a particular path. That's what the heuristic is. The bias is something that I'd say blind to. Yeah. We're completely blind to, and we are also, classic quote out of the book is, we are blind, but we're also blind to our blindness.
Yeah.
And so this is where he starts talking in different types of biases. Some of the classic ones are confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Where you're able to confirm essentially what it is you believe to be correct. So you believe something is correct, and then you'll find some way to make that correct in the real world. So
you look for the things.
You look for the causation. You look for the causation that justifies your answer to the solution.
Your answer, yeah.
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about statistical judgments that are incorrect, and the way a problem is presented to you, you're more likely to lean towards a certain solution that's not right because of the way it's been presented. If the type of language that's used, or if someone's anchored your thoughts on a high number, you're more likely to pick a high percentage if someone asks you a question of probability.
Yeah, how many eggs are in this jar, Lockie? And then I say there's 3,000, there's a 3,000 sitting on the wall over there. I'm
more likely to say
2,500, but there's probably
a lot of eggs.
There could be 200 in there.
That's a big jar.
It's a massive jar. Hey, it's coming up to Easter. I would like to get that for Easter.
I guess you could say, what are the size of the eggs would be probably.
It could be M&Ms. They could be M&Ms. M&M eggs.
That's it. So how do we use these things? I think that's something he really talks about is and this comes back to what you're talking about in terms of meditation and mindfulness and that sort of stuff, is recognizing that these things are happening and putting things in place that make you go, okay, this is this situation. I've made this X judgment. I might be something that triggers you to say, oh, I might actually be making a decision that's in the realm of incorrect, where I might be biased or using my geez, I'm doing a
no. It's to
help
trigger.
me out here.
This is the challenge.
Trigger is the word I'm looking for.
The challenge with all of these sort of psychological orientated books is it's bringing them into the sort of day to day is sometimes just an awareness of their existence.
Yeah, it's such a positive thing to just even know about it.
Yeah.
And putting the systems in place that go, hang on, we might need to look at this a different way and trigger system too. That's kind of how you deal with it. You're not going to ever stop them from happening, and that's a key takeaway, is that these things will happen. There's nothing humanly possible for you to do, because you are a human, to stop them happening to you, but you can put things in place that remind you or have a different decision-making protocol for certain types of things that really allow you to deal with it.
So we've been talking about quite a bit about shifting a decision or shifting our thinking, right? But there's also simply being mindful of how much thinking we're doing, or how much energy and effort we're putting into things, and how that influences us as well. So it's important to know out of the what he talks about in the book called cognitive ease, and how we are more inclined to go towards something that's cognitively easier.
Like a good narrative or something like that, you mean? Or?
Yeah, well, he says that there's a few key things, which is related experiences, clear display, primed ideas, or good mood. Really interesting, interesting combination of
He
things.
does all sorts of experiments where he makes people answer questions while they're frowning and they're more critical, or
the classic cold cup. Have you the cold cup experiment?
No.
Where they basically there's the experimenters sitting in this town square somewhere, and they get passers-by to hold this cup. Now, in some instances, the cup I'm going to do a very short version of this. The cup's got some warm coffee in it, hot coffee in it. And in other instances, it's a cold cup. Like it's got a bloody iced coffee in it. And there was correlation between those that had the cold cup given to them, having a far more negative lens of the world when answering a questionnaire that followed holding the cup, versus those that were holding the warm cup. They had a positive, and they were very sort of neutral questions.
Yeah.
And there was opportunity to sort of lean either way. And there was a major trend between those that simply were anchored to the, or primed, I should say, towards the warm versus the cold, which is so interesting. And all of those key, those sort of 4 key things go into what creates ease. And then ease is what feels familiar, feels true, feels good, and feels effortless. And it's really, this is quite interesting because this is where you get into a space of achieving flow. You know,
that's linked.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because in a state of flow, you're maintaining this sort of focused attention, if you will, on particular activities, but it requires no extra or no exertion or no self-control. Thereby, you're freeing resources to be directed to the task at hand. So you're completely consumed by the ease at which you're flowing through a particular activity, that you're not distracted by everything else that's going on, which means that it's almost effortless in terms of how you're.
So something else I took out of this was Bayesian decision making, and we won't go into it now because we'll do it on our super forecasting episode. But
we've touched on it in Black Swan, and we'll go into depths in
outside versus inside sort of decision making, and also I think just if you want to understand the world better and if you want to understand yourself better, you have to read this book, and that sums it up for me.
And is there anything you take away, mate? What are you going to, other than the awareness of things, is there anything that you're going to?
Oh, well, you just stole what I'm going to take away. You can't do that. You can't preface that. I think takeaways are, I think there's not much more important takeaway than just understanding that this happens to you no matter how smart you think you are. And so what I take away is to put certain triggers in place that allow me to question certain decisions. For example, now when I'm predicting something into the future, such as a financial forecast or the amount of time something's going to take, I'll immediately do my estimate and then double it and see how I feel.
Is that because that's worked in the past?
Well, no, it's because of this book, and I think that's mainly time. For, say, financial forecast, I'll times it by 20 to 25%. And that's just an example of, and then I'll reassess and see how that feels, and I might back it off. But it's just something I've put in place to go, hey, you're probably wrong.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's that doubt yourself. Like actually doubt yourself. Don't be so confident in.
And put feedback loops in place so that you actually know how you actually did, not how you think you did. An example the other day is I'm in a footy tipping competition, and I looked back over, I reckon I'm pretty good at footy tipping. I looked back over my previous 2 years and I'd come like 7th and 8th out of an 8-person competition. And I'm like, I'm actually not good at this. Why? And I would have gone through oblivious thinking how good I am and finished 8th again.
Why did you think you were good?
Just because I've got a massive ego.
So, but wouldn't you have got the wooden spoon the last 2 years, or that was like too friendly a competition?
Like I'd obviously just not computed that I didn't go well. Like I must just remembered the good things I'd been doing and that I was in the mix and thought I had a chance.
I think the fact that you've clearly even just got your tips in is probably doing better than what I would do. So for me, there was the doubt yourself and really that knowing that we do have a daily quota of energy and effort that we can exert, you know? So in that cognitive ease space, he really talks about how you do have a set quota each day and to therefore not be consumed by things that don't need your attention, don't need your effort. Focus them in on, and this comes back to the mindful, and the meditation side of things, is focus your energy and your effort where it needs to be, or where you've got a better chance of it being applied to something that's going to be better suited for you. So not worrying about all the shit that just happened for the last hour and how poorly you did, or how you made someone feel, or how you think that they felt because that you saw that you thought that they felt in a particular way.
Use your energy that you've got wisely.
Use it now and here.
Wow.
As opposed to behind and forward, which is where we spend most of our time. And again, recognizing the importance of luck. I know we didn't talk about regression to the mean, but really important to realize that, you know, I heard something the other day, right, on how much of an influence the CEO can make in a company, right? And there's been all these studies done, and, you know, trying to pinpoint performance based on solely the influence of the CEO on company performance. And there was something like a 0.3 correlation. And essentially what that means is if you have two companies that are the same thing, two similar companies, and you have a good CEO in one and a bad CEO in another, there's going to be about a 5 to 10% difference in outcome based on the CEO's performance. That's how much influence that they have across the company.
That's really interesting.
So, you know, you've got instead of a success rate of 50%, you've got a success rate of 55, 60%, which maybe across a long period of time and lots of iterations of things can certainly add up. But it's not like a good CEO is going to come in and the company has a 90% chance now of being put back on the rails and changing the world.
Yeah.
It's very, very minute, very subtle. And I think that's the killer for me and recognizing.
Keeping your eyes open.
Keeping your eyes open.
Thanks, mate.
That was good.
Awesome.
Thanks
See you next week.
Cheers.